There's a moment that keeps repeating itself when you spend enough time inside the world of All in the Family. And it's not a big moment, not something dramatic or cinematic. It's something quieter than that, something almost ordinary. And yet it carries so much weight that you can feel it lingering long after the scene moves on. And that moment is when someone says something they believe is completely normal, completely justified. And the room shifts just slightly, not with an explosion, not with immediate outrage, but with that subtle tension that comes from realizing something deeper has just been revealed. And that's really where this show lives, especially when you focus on how prejudice is exposed not through speeches or lessons, but through conversation, through those everyday exchanges that start small and slowly unfold into something much more revealing, something that makes you pause, sometimes laugh, sometimes feel uncomfortable, often both at the same time. I keep coming back to one particular kind of situation that feels like the clearest example of this, where Archie brings up a story, maybe something he heard from maybe something he picked up from the news, something about a group of people, and the way he tells it, it's not framed as hostility, at least not in his mind. It's framed as common sense, as observation, as something that doesn't even need to be questioned. And that's what makes it so powerful, because the prejudice isn't presented as something loud and obvious. It's presented as something casual, something embedded in the way he speaks, the way he thinks, the way he understands the world. At first, the room doesn't react immediately. There's a moment, a pause, like everyone is deciding how to respond. And then Mike steps in because he recognizes what's happening beneath the surface. He sees the assumptions, the generalizations, the unfairness that Archie doesn't fully acknowledge. And when Mike challenges it, he doesn't just disagree. He tries to unpack it, to pull it apart piece by piece, to show where it comes from, to expose the gaps in logic. And that's where the conversation begins to shift from casual to charged. Archie pushes back, of course, because from his perspective he's being misunderstood. He's not trying to be harmful. He's just saying what he believes to be true. And that's where the tension really builds, because now it's not just about the original statement. It's about identity, about whether Archie sees himself as a good person, about whether he's being unfairly judged. Gloria reacts in her own way, often more emotionally, because she feels the impact of what's being said, not just as an idea, but as something that affects real people, real lives, and her frustration comes from that disconnect between intention and impact. And then there's who listens in that quiet, attentive way. And when she speaks, it's not to argue or to prove a point. It's to bring a different kind of perspective into the room, one that's rooted in empathy, in the idea that people deserve to be seen as individuals rather than categories. What's fascinating is how the conversation doesn't resolve neatly. It doesn't move from ignorance to enlightenment in a straight line. Instead, it loops, it circles, it gets stuck, it shifts. And through that process, the prejudice is exposed not as a single moment, but as a pattern, something that's woven into the way Archie sees the world. The living room setting makes all of this feel more immediate, more intimate, because there's no distance, no separation between the characters and the audience. It feels like you're right there, sitting on the couch, listening, reacting, trying to process what's being said. And that's part of what made All in the Family so groundbreaking in the 1970s, because it brought these kinds of conversations into a space that was usually reserved for lighter, simpler storytelling. And instead of avoiding difficult topics, it leaned into them. At a time when issues of race, class, and identity were becoming more visible in American society, the show didn't present those issues in a distant or abstract way. It showed how they played out in everyday life, in ordinary conversations, between people who cared about each other, but didn't always understand each other. And the humor in these scenes is what makes it all work, because it creates a kind of balance. It allows the audience to engage with the tension without feeling overwhelmed by it. You might laugh at the way Archie expresses himself, at the confidence with which he delivers his perspective, even when it's clearly flawed. And then you might laugh at Mike's attempts to break it down, at the way he struggles to get through, at the way the conversation keeps slipping into familiar patterns. But that laughter is always mixed with something else, a recognition that what's being discussed isn't just fictional. It reflects real attitudes, real conversations that were happening then and in many ways are still happening now. As the scene unfolds, you start to notice how each character contributes to the exposure of that prejudice in different ways. Archie reveals it through his words, through his assumptions, through the way he frames his understanding of the world. Mike exposes it by challenging it, by refusing to let it go unexamined, by pushing for clarity and accountability. Gloria highlights its emotional impact, showing how it affects people on a personal level, and softens the space, creating moments where empathy can enter the conversation, even if it doesn't fully change the outcome. And that's the thing, the outcome doesn't need to be a resolution. The point isn't to fix the prejudice in one conversation. It's to reveal it, to make it visible, to bring it into the open where it can be examined. There's often a moment where the tension reaches its peak, where it feels like the conversation might break down completely. And then something shifts, maybe says something gentle, maybe someone takes a step back, and the intensity eases just enough to keep things from falling apart. But the underlying issue remains. It doesn't disappear, it lingers. It becomes part of the ongoing dynamic between the characters. Watching it now, you can still feel how relevant it is, because prejudice doesn't always appear in obvious ways. It often shows up in conversations, in assumptions, in the way people talk about others without fully realizing what they're revealing. And that's what the show captures so well, the subtlety of it, the way it can exist alongside humor, alongside everyday life without being immediately confronted or resolved. It also shows how difficult it can be to challenge those ideas, how conversations can circle without reaching a clear conclusion, how people can hold onto their beliefs even when they're questioned. And yet, there's something hopeful in the fact that the conversation happens at all, that the ideas are challenged, that the discomfort is acknowledged. As the scene winds down, there's no clear victory, no sense that Archie has completely changed or that Mike has fully succeeded in his challenge, just a gradual return to something quieter, something more familiar. But something has been revealed, Something has been brought into the open, and that matters. Because once something is visible, once it's been spoken and examined, it becomes part of the ongoing conversation, something that can't be completely ignored. And maybe that's the real strength of All in the Family, the way it uses conversation not just as a tool for humor, but as a way of exploring deeper truths, of exposing things that might otherwise remain hidden. So when the living room settles back into its usual rhythm, when the voices quiet down and the moment passes, there's still something in the air, something that hasn't been resolved but has been acknowledged. And that's enough to keep the conversation going, not just within the show, but beyond it, in the way you think about it afterward, in the way you recognize those same patterns in the world around you. Because in the end, it's not about delivering a final answer. It's about opening the door to a deeper understanding, even if that understanding comes slowly, even if it never feels complete. And that's the kind of storytelling that stays with you, not because it tells you what to think, but because it shows you how people think, how they speak, how they reveal themselves in the simplest, most ordinary moments.